Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all doing? It's good to see everybody. Yes, I am thrilled to be here today with Bernardo Mazón, James Lujan, and in the middle, Jaime Magaña. Their work is integral to our conversations about adapting, translating, and performing Shakespeare in the US-Mexico borderlands. All three playwrights have works that appear in The Bard in the Borderlands. Mazón is the author of Measure for Measure / Medida por Medida, a bilingual measure for measure. Yes, it's a great play set in a border town. And his play is forthcoming actually in volume 2 of the anthology. So make sure to pre-order that. Lujan and Magaña both have Romeo and Juliet adaptations in volume 1. Lujan is the author of Kino and Teresa, a play set in colonial Santa Fe and nearby Pecos Pueblo, in which the Juliet figure is Spanish and the Romeo figure is indigenous. Magaña is the author of the tragic Corrido of Romeo and Lupe, a bilingual adaptation of Romeo and Juliet set in a farm working community in the Rio Grande Valley. Before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit more about each of our playwrights. James Lujan is a filmmaker, playwright, and educator from Taos Pueblo, New Mexico. In 2012, he started the Cinematic Arts and Technology program at the Institute of American Indian Arts, IAIA, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he serves as department chair. In 2022, he was appointed to the New Mexico Governor's Council on Film and Media Industries. His play, Kino and Teresa, was first produced in 2005 by Native Voices at the Autry in Los Angeles. It also received a staged reading at IAIA in 2016 as part of the first Folio's US tour. Jaime Magaña is a playwright and poet. In addition to writing and then directing the first performance of the tragic Corrido of Romeo and Lupe, he has also directed community theater productions and hosted several open mic events since 2017. He was born in Guadalajara, Jalisco, and currently resides in the Rio Grande Valley, where he is raising his 4 sons. Bernardo Mazón is a border brat bred in San Diego's South Bay. Raised in Chula Vista, California, he graduated from San Diego State University with degrees in literature and theater. While in school, Bernardo became a professional actor, director, writer, educator, and producer, cutting his teeth at the La Jolla Playhouse and San Diego Rep. Since then, his journeys in theater making have taken him around the country to work with organizations of high prestige alongside grassroots community-based projects. He has served as a steering committee member of the Latinx Theater Commons, forged grants and awards opportunities for dramaturgs across Latin America, and co-founded Tu Yo Theater, a nonprofit for Latinx artists and audiences. Most recently, he performed in the site-specific play Taxilandia when it came to San Diego. Welcome to all 3 playwrights. I look forward to a vibrant conversation about your plays, as well as the important collaborative work of creating theater that is grounded in Chicanx and Indigenous communities. So to begin, I'm going to ask you all, could you please tell us a little bit about your experience with Shakespeare, whether in your education or in your artistic career? Who would like to go first? Go for it, Bert.
The 2 are looking at me. I think I had the same relationship with Shakespeare that many of us had. It was ancient English to me, and even in No Fear, Shakespeare was not accessible. And when a high school teacher tells you, oh, read this, it'll help you, and it doesn't help you, it really fucks up your reading. I did not think that I would ever relate to that. And when I was in 11th grade, I decided to take AP literature course, which had nothing to do with much of an interest in literature. Honestly, it's just because the girl I liked was in the class, who was in Pembroke. I wanted to use it. There was an assignment to memorize 16 lines of Shakespeare. For some reason, I knew I had good memorization skills, and so I helped my friends memorize their stuff. And one night on a whim, like over a few beers, I was underage. I memorized 50 lines instead of 60. And I watched a Kenneth Bra video and just copied. And the next day I did the thing, and everyone was floored and asked me to do it again. And I got that that privilege that a lot of people get, which is the encouragement to keep doing it. And so that's kind of when my interest began. So within college, I was becoming interested in theater and actor training, and theater is a democratic tool. Actor training is like the liberation of the person. Where someone asked me, why don't you create a English minute for men? Never read that letter. And they said it was because the Oregon Shakespeare Festival had done a English inspired measure, and so they were like, the boss over there is Bill Roush. I looked him up and I was like, I think his email is probably Bill R. And so I emailed him and he actually replied. And he said, here's the script, use as much as you wanted it. Hardly any of it was it Spanish, not even 2%. And so I made a thing, and that play of mine, which I never thought would kind of come to life again, except for that community production, was kind of my breakout and a main career of community engaging theater. And I think I'll leave it at that now.
I feel that, when I started to read Shakespeare, like when I realized like I already am familiar with a lot of these themes and these stories. And the fact that I didn't read it as a kid, because in Guadalajara they don't teach us Shakespeare, right? At least in elementary, right? You hear it from like the Chespirito, like you hear it from the Mexican TV and whatnot, right? But you don't read Shakespeare. And I feel like the fact that, when I was a kid, I used to get books from the library, and and I was too lazy to read them. So I would make up my own story looking at the cover. Right? Like, this is what's happening in this book. And I feel like that's a lot of what, when I got approached to write an adaptation for Romeo and Juliet, it was, like I said, themes that have always existed in my life, but I could treat them in my own way because I was not familiar with the actual story as much, And then as I got to translate it and work through it and everything, it was really an experience of my own, like it wasn't set up for me in a way. Like I really got to find my way through it, and that's pretty much my experience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, it's a nice mic. Give me that one.
I've had sort of a love-hate relationship with Shakespeare over the years. Like most people, I was exposed to Shakespeare in high school and was really resistant to it because of the language. And like most people, in high school I was shown the film version of Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, and that really captured my imagination with the colors and the action and the emotion. And then you just see so much of Shakespeare's influence everywhere in art and culture, and that's it's because of that's influenced my work.
Do you want to talk to us a bit about how your Shakespeare adaptations fit in with your larger body of work? And maybe, sure, we'll go in the same order since the mic's going down that way.
A lot of my work has been less inspired than it has been really requested. And that is a fortune. Sometimes one I had to hop for really aggressively. But other times it's kind of created a capacity for me as I transition into doing theater by community, with community, outside of the commercial or industrial complex. You start to, I wouldn't even say you're sourcing stories, you're just creating a space for a community to do that. And so the Shakespeare production that was an impetus for me in this field was just a byproduct of that. I do love Shakespeare now. I've come to really appreciate the ways in which it can articulate human experience in a timeless manner. But I'm the first person to say, why are we doing Shakespeare? This is so annoying.
Yeah, so annoying. I like to go on stories a lot with my answers, I guess. It just triggered it that way, right? When I was a kid, my brother, he has Down syndrome. And he was very sick because a worm got into his stomach, okay? And he was close to death. And we took him to the hospital. Nobody could save him. And then we took him to a curandero, okay? A curandera, her name was Mago. Out of all names, Mago. And she was across the street from when my mom grew up. And Mago saved my little brother, okay? And that's just like, forever in my life, I was just like, wow, the magic behind that. And I feel that one thing that I'm searching for in my stories is that magic. And that's why they're Mexican, and and they talk about those mysteries. And yes, they talk about all these bigger social subjects and everything, because that's part of what surrounds my environment. But a lot of what I'm seeking is that magical experience, and what that esa magia mexicana is.
Great, thank you.
Kino and Teresa actually wasn't my first foray into community indigenous theater. A few years prior, I was contacted by Ramon Flores, who's actually a playwright who's going to be featured in Volume 2. He was looking for a native writer because he was writing a play about the Pueblo revolt called Casi Hermanos, which was based on an actual account of two half-brothers, one Spanish, one Pueblo, who met each other on the battlefield. So he hired me to co-write the play with him. I did a lot of research into the Pueblo revolt. So when the opportunity came along a few years after that to write another play, I was asked to pitch a few ideas, and the idea that was selected was the basis of Kino and Teresa, which was Romeo and Juliet in the aftermath of the Pueblo revolt, and so that's how that came to be, and I envision it as a second part in the trilogy. I'll eventually get around to writing the third part of the trilogy, which is going to be based on, it's in the same time period, the Pueblo revolt, but this one's going to be based on Upeth, and it's about the Pueblo revolt leader Pope, and it's going to be called the Pueblo King. So one of these days I'll get along to writing that.
Volume 4.
Yeah, Volume 4.
Can I answer?
Yes, I quickly have a super quick follow-up question, which is that Ramon Flores and Lynn Knight's play, The Merchant of Santa Fe, right, is also set in the sort of context broadly of the Pueblo revolt. Did you play a role in that production, its initial production?
Yeah, actually, that's how Ramon and I met each other. I had a small role in that play. Yeah.
Very cool. Of Lázaro, the sort of servant figure and merchant was really reconfigured in interesting ways in that production. Very cool. Yes, Bernardo.
Yeah, sis, right? I don't know if you have read or seen the play called The Play You Want by Bernardo. It was in LA like a year or so ago. Check it out. It's a message to the world of theater about the prejudices and the pressures that artists like many of us face trying to exist in it. Anyway, I thought of that play because of the work I'm talking about, which it's work that I would eat up, I think a lot of us would. And yet, ironically, the playwright, towards the end, as a clown character who speaks to the audience, and he says, I am the narco, the deported one, the baby in a cage. I am magical realism. I am the Shakespeare production with a Latin twist. I'm exactly what you want me to be. And I just thought of that, there's this kind of thing that we don't really talk about, but we play into it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sure thing.
Yeah, I think that leads into my next question, because I hear a lot of this love-hate relationship, right, with Shakespeare, and it's kind of cool to appropriate and adapt, but on the other hand, why are we doing this one more time, right? So I'm wondering if y'all could talk a little bit more about what the value of appropriating Shakespeare in Indigenous and Chicanx context is, as well as the real limitations of that framework. Who would like to go first? Sadis?
It's like the value of translating any great classic, I think these works, they're important But I read them and I have a great time. So I want to share them, and also with what you said right now of the things that this thing that we want to express, right? I think we reject a lot of a while back. I was thinking about this kind of phantom world that surrounds us. Where we know there's a presence of, for instance, me as a Mexican, I in Guadalajara, I would see the Tolteca things, right? But I didn't know what they were. They were these big mysterious rocks that spoke of a mystery, right? And I think that these stories, these spaces, allow us to talk about those things, to bring them to life, to keep them alive, and that is why it's important for Shakespeare or any of these writers to continue to be translated and for people to be able to, as you said, see what they can bring into these stories, right?
Yeah, I think for me personally, the value is not only introducing indigenous audiences to Shakespeare, where they would not otherwise have an interest in Shakespeare, by putting it in the context of historical or cultural events that they can relate to. But also, on the other side, it's an opportunity to bring non-native audiences into to understand Native American and indigenous history through the lens of Shakespeare, because they're familiar with the work, and now they can see how it applies. We apply it to our own stories.
Yeah, I feel like the ethnic Shakespeare that we do is the palatable thing that commercial companies will put on. It's like their entryway into developing a Latinx or Latina audience. And so, I mean, my involvement, I think it's partly in defiance of Puritan norms of how Shakespeare should be done, of high culture, but also uplifting our people and the way we talk. I think it's been in a few panels already, the way that we internalize narratives about who we are and where we're and what we can do. So that's kind of it. Yeah.
One thing you said just reminded me of something, that there are a lot of theater companies, at least on the indigenous side, that are reluctant to produce original work.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the only way we can get our work produced is by doing adaptations of Shakespeare. I also did an adaptation of Dangerous Liaisons set during the Taos art colony of the 1920s. And that was produced because it was based on a work that people were familiar with.
And I want to add to that actually now. I'm going down a rabbit hole. So much of the productions, the plays that are curated by the regional theater system, they're still white adjacent. Even if they're not adaptations, it's still curated by a predominantly white organization and staff. And the reality is they ignore the few individuals usually who are bold enough to speak up about those things. And they're perfectly okay doing plays that the people they claim want to go see the play don't actually go see. And so it's kind of like, in the meantime, I don't want to say this is the best we can do, but it's kind of, I think it's where we have the most leverage to alter the economy of the bodies that are going in the room and the bodies that are going up on stage.
Do you all think that these adaptations can make space for other plays that don't fit that white norm that the theater companies are saying everybody wants to see replicated over and over again?
Yes, I would say yes. No, yeah. I mean, I didn't have much more to say. Yes, I think when you start to allow yourself to rethink things, you get out of your stuck norms. A lot of it's what gets me in a writer's block is when I'm obsessed over an idea. And I'm just this idea is fantastic. I don't want it to change. And then eventually I'm you know what? I need to let it go and rethink this. And I think it goes like that, like well, you know, there's like those are the plays that get sold, that like you say, they're like the ones that get put up there, right? But I feel that doing these appropriations allow us to down there in FAR, we would put up these plays, and we know that there was the Winter Texans that were coming down, right? So we knew that we were like putting up a show for the Winter Texans. They had to like it.
That sounds like a play. The Winter Texans.
Right? Yeah. And you know, but it's great for them to come watch it and for the conversation to be challenging. You know, you're not just gonna get what you know, we're doing this thing. And you know, I remember I did it, and this guy came up to me after, and he's like, well, that's cool that you did this, but you know, Romeo and Juliet belongs to Shakespeare. He didn't feel that I should do an appropriation. And then, you know, I learned that Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet wasn't originally even from Shakespeare, right? So these are stories, like I said, these are classic stories. That's why you keep on rethinking them. And if you don't rethink them, then that's where they get stuck. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with the politics and economics of theater that sort of drive us in this direction. Unless you have a big name in theater, and where you can dictate your own terms and your own work, you pretty much have to give the audiences what they want, and what they want, for better or worse, is more of the same. But you know, classic stories that are universal and keep on telling stories that need to be heard over and over. So that's where the value is.
I'd like to talk a little about language. You talked, Bernardo, about sort of showing how people talk, right? And thinking about like language, especially in border spaces. Yeah. So I was wondering, I think for you and Ceresu as well, your plays are really fully bilingual, and you're doing really interesting things with translation and sometimes really adaptation of specific, you know, Shakespearean speeches that are really quite well known, and thinking about translating them into border Spanish or Spanglish or you know, sort of mixtures of different dialects. Can you talk more about your thoughts on translation?
Yeah, I remember seeing plays that were supposed to be for me, my family, my community, kind of entering the field, and without naming names, I just remember thinking like, this is cool, but it's not us. This is that zip code. This is that part of LA, and this isn't San Isidro. This isn't West Chula Vista. Anyway, I think there's a personal motivation to really make that accessible, to be able to explain to my parents what I do and for them to understand. And to this day, it's still really like large stigma. You know, like the Latin world is divisive as hell. Maybe we can talk about that later, but I like how you're talking about how the greats, or those who have a name in the field, out of a kind of particular oomph, because I've noticed as much reverence as I have for some of those writers that are so prolific and established, at some point, I think if you observe critically their work over the years, you start to see their work become more white adjacent. And it's like their canon is just not as strong at some point than it is at another time. Perhaps when they have more freedom and less influenced by the industry. And so we're talking about the quality of language and how we translate. I noticed as I was developing as an artist that there was also a correlation between how confident and how natural the Spanish speakers were in their plays. Like I could read their plays and be like, you know, my grammar's not perfect. You know, some editors in this room have helped me with my material. Thank them always. But theirs was worse, you know, and like my people would call that out, and they would say, "We don't know who this was written by, but it wasn't one of us."
Yes, I think like a lot of this stuff is like regional, you know, like food and things like that. Like in a lot of Mexican culture, food changes depending where you go. The way people dress changes according to where you go, and so does language. And there's a language people speak in the Valley, and that's the language I was seeking to capture. And Romeo and Juliet, allowed me to, since there's the duality of the families, it allowed me to also play with the language in that duality, right? Maybe if I had a different story, I might have not play so much into the language because it wouldn't have highlighted it as in the same way, right? But it is really, like he said, like capturing where you come from, right? And that region, that culture, and the people from that place being able to find themselves in these stories, being able to relate to them, being able to find subjects that they have grievances about, or things that they want to talk about to their parents and their friends, and so they're able to find it in the story. And lastly, I think it's kind of cool whenever like there's a presentation and you're talking in Spanish and all the Spanish people are like following you, and then you switch to English and they don't know what's going on anymore. And then all the English speakers are like following the English, and then you switch to Spanish and they don't know what's going on anymore. And so everybody's just continuously like, but what was said in Spanish and what was said in English? And if you become more curious about the other language, that's plus.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk as well, James, about the way language functions in your play, right? Because the context is different, and Spanish is so clearly a colonial language in the context of colonial Santa Fe, and indigenous language is present, but sort of more so in sort of the attempts to erase or restrict indigenous Pueblo language use. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, part of that was not intentional, actually. In the creative process, as I was developing the play, I actually wanted to give equal weight to the Spanish language portions of the script and the Pueblo portions of the script. The reason why I chose Pecos Pueblo as the Pueblo, for those of you who don't know, there are historically have been many Pueblo tribes along the Rio Grande, each with their own language group, and I chose Pecos, which is an extinct tribe, but I chose it because at the time it was geographically the closest to Santa Fe, and so I wanted, obviously, the action to be able to fit that. But anyway, so because the tribe is extinct, the closest equivalent today to the language that was spoken, the Keres language, is Jemez Pueblo. And so in the development process, we contacted Jemez Pueblo because we wanted to get their permission and their guidance in using the Pueblo language in the play. And so as I wrote it, I incorporated a lot of Pueblo words, a lot of Pueblo phrases to match the Spanish that's spoken. And but the caveat is when we reached out to the Jemez Pueblo, they never got back to us. Mm. So we just kept on developing the play. But it was, I don't want to say the day before opening night, but very close to opening night. The producer of the play, Randy Reinholz, calls me up in a panic and says, James, Pecos Pueblo Jemez Pueblo has called us. They found out that they're using their language in the play, and they're threatening to sue unless we remove all the language. So we did, and that's why the indigenous language isn't featured as much. But I like your interpretation that the colonial influence to squash the language is what caused so little of it to be used in the play.
Sort of a powerful act of resistance, right? Not to be incorporated into the Shakespeare industry and sort of white theater. Not that you were doing white theater, but in the. But
it just shows how protective
right.
that they are of their culture and their language.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. So each of your plays were created and produced within these particular communities. Could you tell us a bit more about the production process and what that was like to kind of, just be working within the communities in terms of actors, but then I guess you were giving us a sense of that in terms of people who had a stake in the plays themselves. Anything about the production process, working in communities that you'd like to share?
I remember as I was falling in love with acting and acting training, I just thought, well, I'll bring those values into the room, create a safe playing space, and it's just going to be about letting the actors have fun, but also kind of troubleshooting the script. we were all mainly volunteer, some of us were at schools, some of us are people in the community who were part of what is called community theater, which amateur theater, whatever the pejorative means. And others were, I never really figured out the term for this, but I love working on people who've never been on stage before. That's like always something I met in my work and was present at the time too. And so we were, quite a diverse group of people when it came to experience. And so, as I learned then, working with community theater, you have to be very patient. It was the first time I ever had like cinematic assertive talk with my cast, being you all have to move your lines or else, I'll pull the plug. It was empty for we were into it anyways, but I can't believe them because, being a play outside of the daily grind is really hard. We weren't incentivizing, I couldn't promise them money. There hadn't been a grant for to me, it was a ton of money at the time. It was like $10,000. Something to work with. But that grant had been pulled because they kept on trying to direct the idea, being like, do it in this place and do it in this way. And some point I was like, we're going to do it this way. And so they cut the money, and I guess I screwed over the cast. But fortunately, doing it at the library and thinking strategically, the Folger's coming soon, it's going to be at the public library. I was nagging the administration there to just give us money. I was like, we're doing this for free. Maybe people are going to love it. Give us whatever you got. And they threw like $2,000 there. But that knew into the process. The process was very, very messy. And we were rehearsing in like small little rooms around the library building, other public venues, classrooms, and we thankfully never did move to the living room. I refused to do that.
That's where you draw the line.
The theater is super difficult. I did theater for 5 years in a row, and then I decided I needed to take a break. I was doing 3 plays a year, and it's hell on work, right? When you're in a production, it's there's 2 stories that play out, and they're both just as interesting. It's the story that's in the play, and then the story of what went on behind the scenes, right? And why that movie came out the way it came out. And that tells you a lot of the movie itself almost, and even the choice that you couldn't put in that translation. That is such an interesting story, within there's a story behind the story, right? And it tells you so much of what is going on in the story, and it reflects it, And I feel like that's, doing this play, I got to see a lot of those reflections because it's a border play and it was being produced in the border. All the difficulties of a regular production were there. Híjole, I lost my train of thought. I think I'm tired. Are you guys tired?
Thinking about it gets you tired.
No, doing theater is hard, man. Just thinking about it got me tired.
Well, I just described one episode of community engagement that didn't quite turn out the way we wanted to, but after I was commissioned to write the play, apparently they didn't have money to produce the play, so it sat dormant for about 4 years before I was contacted by Native Voices at the Auditory, which is a national native theater company based in Los Angeles. They somehow had heard about my play, and just out of the blue, they said they want to produce it. But they're going to spend a year and a half developing it. So they hired a Shakespearean dramaturge to work with me to make sure, I guess, the integrity of the Shakespeare was upheld, and which I didn't really have too much of a problem with, because the dramaturge Frank Dwyer, who's based in Los Angeles, was very accommodating and very, very flexible. So he wasn't cracking the whip all the time every time I veered outside the Shakespearean text. So he understood what I was trying to do, and so spent a year and a half of development and had staged readings, so we get more community engagement and feedback, and they were so committed to the production, fortunately, that instead of having 2 full productions per year, which is what they used to do, they combined it into one big, expensive production because of all the actors they had to hire, and it's an equity production, so they had to pay equity rates. So it was a big deal for them that year, and fortunately we got a rave review in the LA Times, so I think it paid off.
Great. What do y'all hope for the future of Shakespearean adaptation, translation, and performance? And a sort of analog question, what about for the future of Chicanx and Indigenous theater? You can answer one or both of those questions to start. Who wants to go first?
I know I don't want my people to stigmatize my work anymore. You know, it's a hard thing personally that, you know, my friends and family know I'm here in San Antonio for a day, and they're like, talking about what? You know, that's a thing I really hope for. But I also can't blame them. You know, the truth is that whiteness is operating in the background everywhere we go in this country, either with rebellion or with some kind of strike and private. But I think that the demographics and the kind of style of what gets put out there is just too American for my people. Yeah. Oh yeah, and I've noticed that like they can't usually say what it is, but they feel it. Like they just don't connect to the place. And so I hope that we can fix that.
I feel like that's a tough question, because you know I hope for the best things, obviously, right? And I don't think Shakespeare, the conversation about Shakespeare will ever change, because Shakespeare is that, and I think it's always gonna open up this type of conversation, you know, and I hope the conversation, I like, you know, the fact that you guys have done this project is part of what I hope for. If I did the play and this just stayed silent, well, it wouldn't have reached its merit. So I hope for this become more accessible, and I hope for young people to be able to explore it and write and grow with it. But I really do feel that, you know, I hope that the future generations of young people are able to reach it, and it's so important that it's in a school setting.
Well, I mean, as the past has shown us, there's always going to be an interest in Shakespeare. As I related in my story, somehow people have found out about the play that I've written, based on Shakespeare. So they keep reaching out to me, inviting me to conferences or speak to the Shakespeare Association of America. Shakespeare will always be a conduit to tell other stories, and that's where I think it's an opportunity for underrepresented writers to get their voices out, because as I indicated before, there is just a reluctance in general to invest in anything original. That maybe the way to get your foot in the door is to use the tried and true, because there's less risk. Obviously, no one wants to. Theater company wants to take any more risk than they have to, because they want to keep their doors open. But beyond that, I mean, what I hope for the future, from my point of view, as you heard from my bio, most of my work is done in the film world right now, and so it's empowering young Indigenous voices to get their voices out and their stories out, but in a way that is not only meaningful to them, but meaningful to non-native audiences, because there's a lot of stories to share, a lot of untold stories, and a lot of power that I think will be very interesting to non-native audiences.
You know,
A few more demands.
okay, go for it. Okay. And you know, there's like a back and forth there because I love the idea of stories that the whole world knows, right? And I think, and I wish for more of the more stories that are not so worldwide known because they're white or whatnot, and more stories that are like, you know, for instance, like just Hispanic stories, even legends from like indigenous and all that, for them to not be just like, oh, we're researching into that. No, these are world stories. But then also a part of me loves the idea of being able to protect that from this world view, and to be able to experience things as you go and where you go without having to everybody share this kind of like equal view of things, and you get that variety, and everywhere you go is different and it's beautiful. So I want more access to those stories, but I also want those stories to remain what they are.
I thought of a few more demands. One, before the panel started, we joked about how we're three men on this panel. It's actually not something I've ever experienced at the theater conference. And so we're a panel, not a panel.
That's a fine mistake.
Maybe we can hope for that to change next time. I want to see more 50-50 plays. And when I say 50-50, what I mean is, not in a contrived way. But there's been plenty of productions out there where it's like, we'll arbitrarily kind of highlight what text is going to be in Spanish and when or how. Often the translation is done pretty literal. You don't see often an effort to replicate the rhythm and rhyme components of verse. It's hard. Someone earlier was talking about how trochees operate in the Spanish language. It's a great point. And it can happen, but it does take skill. And I think the most important thing for me, as an actor first, is seeing the propagation of teaching methods, of the method of teaching, and what we teach actors particularly, because the techniques that actors learn, even when they're coming from Latinx or Latin actors in the recent scene, are still rooted in whiteness, still using the names like Meisner and Chekhov, Stanislavski. When people have been acting for hundreds of years all over the world and have different ways of doing things.
You?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Those are such important points. I just wanted to say, I guess before we open things up for questions, and maybe questions that y'all might have for each other, that students respond so positively to all of your plays. I've had the privilege of teaching all three of them. And I think there's something about, just sort of maybe characters that y'all have created, like Anieri in Kino and Teresa, for example, because the Romeo figure's mother has just this really powerful voice for Indigenous resistance, right? That they're sort of like attracted to that is not really the Shakespeare, but they're like super, or like in the tragic Corrido, when Romeo and Juliet or Lupe meet, they sort of share, they share the sonnet, but it's a bilingual sonnet, right, in your play, or like the character of Pompey Bum, for example, like in your Pompey's, in Medida por Medida, I think students really just see their communities reflected in themselves and some of the ways that they speak, or they're just sort of really attracted and interested in these elements of the plays that really are not in Shakespeare, or maybe a little bit inspired by Shakespeare, but I think it's really what y'all are bringing to it that they are coming for. So I do see them asking, well, what else have these people written? You know what I mean? So it does seem, even though it's unfortunate, right, that Shakespeare seems to need, in some cases, to be the vehicle for that, it also seems like the students are really tapping into something else there. So you all are doing really amazing work. I think it's having really wide-reaching effects. And I think, especially as you said, Ceres, when younger people are seeing themselves reflected and having access to new stories that they maybe didn't have access to before.
Yeah, it's great to have that feedback because
It's beautiful.
Because I mentioned I worked with a Shakespearean dramaturge, and one of the reasons why I said he was very flexible and understanding was I did want to take what I felt were two of the most underdeveloped characters in Romeo's mother, who I don't even know her name, and the character of Paris, and sort of give my own spin on them to flesh them out further, and make the Anieri character more of a figure of resistance, and because I think that's where the opportunities lie in adapting Shakespeare. Future opportunities is going beyond the text and really not just putting your own spin and your own voice on it, but using that as a stepping stone to create something original and unique.
That's great. So we have some time for questions. I think we can open things up to the audience if y'all have questions, or if you have questions for one another, feel free to jump in and ask them as well.
So you mentioned that you want your actors to have fun, and I study play, and I think it's really interesting how we've been talking about, you know, your adaptations of Shakespeare in general so seriously, and I'm just wondering, to what extent does playfulness come into your process of appropriating Shakespeare, and where does, if anywhere, is there play in taking these like very self-serious texts supposedly and making them something else?
The mic here.
Kid.
Does this thing work? Hello?
Yeah.
So formulaically, I know that back then, even now, if I'm working on a prose section, right? There's total freedom to let the actor say what they think the character or whatever reference they have in real life say. And so I know that in the characters that I wrote, I think I spent so long with Lucio. Most of the language I did write, but I remember telling the actor, like, you know this guy, right? Just talk like him and let's see where the scene goes. And I think, there's co-creation happening there, and there's an audience there, and the rest of the cast, who, if we cast things well, then they're a reliable source of information. And if they're not laughing, then something's probably off, That's a key thing. But I think that is pretty strictly for prose. Not that verse can't be funny. But, I know that also. If we're doing verse or drama or whatever's supposed to be heightened and not funny, we put ourselves in that box. Then, from a technique perspective, we might not do that well. It's totally possible to be engaged and expressive about something that's serious to you, and have a bizarre kind of quirky moment that is human, but still on topic. Does that answer your question? You said you studied play? Yeah. That is really cool. I want to talk to you.
I'm good. I don't know if I need to answer it or we're good. Okay.
Let me make something up.
In theater, there's always, when I would teach theater, I would always tell the actors, the first lesson was like objective and spontaneity, right? And it's like, stick to your objective, but don't lose your spontaneity, right? And really, you need to keep things fresh. You need to be having fun. This feels serious, but I'm having a blast, So it's stuff that's interesting. It's like when you're making music, the next note moves you, and that's how it is, Yeah.
I think this might kind of visualize the example of like playing with drama when drama is fun. I know that I've been with actors who they're doing the thing and like they're feeling things, like it's not they're. But first, we're not normally encouraged to feel those things or express those things, and so we're in a space where it's happening, and to fully embody that, I learned to ask the question, "What do you really want to do?" And I could direct with my eyes closed and go, "What do you really want to do? What do you really want to do?" And you'll see people do interesting things. You'll see someone look at a table, like, "You want to flip that table, huh?" Yeah, flip the table. And they do it, and it's like, you see a lot of kind of catharsis right in front of you, and you can have a laugh about that. I'm like, you flipped that fucking table. Have you seen it? They're like that.
Any of you want to add?
I can add something. When I think it's there's like a, when you close your eyes, there's like a community method there, because like where it's like you kind of allow them. I feel like it kind of reflects also a little bit of what's being done here, where it's like it's because you're not in control so much, and you're not telling the actor do this, do that, do that. Which, I mean, method acting does do that already. The actor creates the character, they bring it into the table and all that. But there is a lot of, there is a consensus that the director sort of is the filter of it's the director's vision. A lot of the vision I try to get, I try to like talk to my actors before, and we try to create a vision together, where I want to like tap out of whatever I was stuck in with my vision, and for them to challenge my vision, right, to a certain degree. It's like that. It's closing your eyes, and it is a method, and it's a method that is not it's really allowing them to bring what they interpret into the story, rather than having this this controlled way. It's kind of like with math. I've heard it say that, like, okay, there's a way they teach math a specific way, and then everybody kind of does math differently on their own. And it's like, I think it's important to kind of know both ways, to like know the way everybody does, like know the way you do it, but also to continue to be able to explore the way you count numbers and refine it. And that's that thing with theater, like going from that method where this is how you do the equation to let's figure out a new method. Yeah.
I like that.
Okay. So when I was first teaching these plays, I was anxious about it and nervous, and asked a student, so did you think it was worthwhile? And then one of them turns to me and says, Professor Gerson, you've gotten it wrong. These plays made Shakespeare worthwhile. And so I wanted to thank you for flipping that particular table. And just ask, were there particular moments that you found it pleasurable or interesting to resist Shakespeare, to break Shakespeare, to flip something over, to invert? Like, were there moments that you found that energizing or pleasurable? And what moments were those?
There's one specific scene in the play where blah 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 blah. Okay, there's one specific scene where the Romeo gets they outcast him, right? But in mine he gets taken into the army, and it was just it was my way of challenging the whole idea of what it means to be banned, right? And here I wanted it to kind of symbolize like being banned from Lupe, right? And being banned from what he truly wants. And those things, they're ways that the story was already offering that for me. And like I said, like I got to flip the table. I didn't destroy the table, but I got to flip it and see it from a different angle. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely fun. Yeah.
I did feel the most energized and inspired when I could color outside the lines and make characters my own, like not just the two I mentioned before, but also the Mercutio character in Kino and Teresa, which I found an opportunity to explore a deeper conflict within the character, because the character in the plays half Spanish, half native, and using that conflict in a way in the context of the original text, where leading up to Mercutio, saying a plague on both your houses. Now it has, I feel it has a little more meaning, since he's not just saying a plague on both houses, but a plague on the Pueblo people and the Spanish people have made this war, this conflict happen. That's literally tearing him apart. I felt the most energized and inspired when I could put my own spin on that, and that's what I think will eventually get me to write my next chapter.
I don't know if any of you have ever seen or heard of a format that has been pioneered in recent years called Public Works. It comes from Public Theater in New York. The Dallas Theater Center has been one of the major regional theaters to kind of adopt the format. And what it essentially is putting on a classical work of theater with an anchoring cast of professional actors, but like no more than maybe 6, and surrounding them were like 100 residents from the city. And the residents play some major characters, functionary characters, the ensemble, of course, on top of like dance troupes and music troupes from around the city. And at some point, these productions are like way beyond adaptation. You know, they're just wildly like Julie Taymor style productions. You know, and I'm bringing this up because I was an associate director, inflated title for assistant at the Dallas Theater Center years back, and they were doing the winter set, and it was pretty obvious that I was brought on because so many people in Dallas are Spanish speaking, and the director was, nor the Dallas Theater Center was Spanish speaking, and so it was like, you know, you crowd control the Spanish speakers, and that's what I essentially did. I was given license to play with the script, and so there were moments where I was like, these white people don't know what I'm doing because they're not gonna do the homework, so I'm just gonna make this. And there were really funny moments. Like there's like a moment, and I can't remember what it is, where Polixenes, he just says a what, something to that effect, and in Spanish he goes "que," and like the whole audience would laugh. All the Spanish speakers would laugh because there's nothing really identifiably funny about it, other than a person kind of randomly going "que," but it makes sense in context. They're speaking out of Spanish shoots, not the only thing, but I think something that really felt like defiance and kind of, what would the dramaturgical word would be, anagnoresis, something like that. You know what I mean? When there was supposed to be a mariachi in the show, on top of a bunch of other dance troupes, you know, like a Salvation dance troupe and like an acrobatics thing and a mariachi. And the mariachi was consistently like late, or only part of the mariachi would come, or sometimes it would come at all rehearsal because they had to work, you know, and at some point the money that the theater center was offering was just not worth justifying based on all of their work. And so they were very clear. They were like, we want you, the director, to manage this relationship with them with a lot of tension. And the mariachi was pretty close to pulling out, and the theater center was like, yeah, you know, we are too, this just isn't working. And I remember like telling the Mexican cast, I was like, hey, you know, the mariachi's not gonna be here. And they were like, what? And can't let that happen. They were really attached to it yet. And so like, it took a lot of negotiation, and it was to the point where I was like, it's opening night, and if they show up, great. If they don't, then we'll just kind of keep moving. And all of us in the cast and creative team were like, are they gonna come? It was like, it was the moment where we could show the theater center that we did business. We could show up, literally, and that we had value. We'd keep on being in the shows. They actually did show up. They showed up right on time, like a minute or two before. They played, you know, a short rendition of Cielito Lindo that I worked on with them, and everybody cried. It was beautiful. And yeah, I think they actually did end up missing a show, but it was worth it. You know, like that moment had the most meaning, I think, to even the non-Spanish speaking audiences.
So you all have been talking about the thing itself and the productions and the theater. I'm curious about craft. Like, how do you all come to this? How do you all begin? You're writing a script. Can you just talk a little bit about your process? Toronto?
Well, in the case of Kino and Teresa, my process is, it helps to be paid to do it.
Yeah.
It helps the process a lot. And it's a lot of research, just a lot of research. And there were, one of the reasons why I was inspired to write the play is I saw so many parallels between the Shakespeare text and what happened historically, insofar as actual conflicts that happened that I read about So it then became easy to find the Shakespearean counterparts in my story, because naturally the prince would be the governor of New Mexico, and it had all sort of worked out that I can almost justify every choice I made historically, and once that I started making those connections, then everything really just kind of fell into place, and it was just a lot of rewriting. I think my first draft was came in at about 100 pages or so, and the first staged reading we had came in at 3 hours. And so when the play was put in development by Native Voices at the Autry, they said, we want you to cut the running time in half. So that was also part of the painful process of sort of weeding out unnecessary characters, unnecessary scenes, and just getting to the point where you have a character that has a block of dialogue that's 4 sentences long, and then is there any way you can have the characters say the same thing in 1 sentence? And so yeah, it's just a and then you have to sort of put your ego aside, and as they say, kill your babies, and just to get it done, because because they're committed to producing this thing.
Yeah.
So I mean that also helps the process. I'm not saying that writing on spec doesn't have its value, because it can, and you have a certain amount of freedom when you write on spec. But in the case of Kino and Teresa, that was essentially the process.
Kind of like you mentioned, you have to really, like I mentioned, there's a lot of rethinking, and you have to, like you said, kill your babies, right? And go through, be willing to go through those changes, right? Because it's so hard. You're like, that's my baby. That sentence is perfect, and it's not. And you read it to everybody, and nobody understands why you're putting it there.
They need to hear that.
And then you talk about it for ages. You sit circularly speaking, ranting why the sentence is good, and it's just better to just let it go. Keeping it simple, allowing yourself to simplify things. I remember when I was in college, a professor told me, if you can't, and I think she got it from somebody else, but if you can't explain it in a simple way, then you don't understand it, right? And being able to simplify things. Also, once an idea enters my mind, it's kind of like falling in love. It's like you start seeing her face everywhere. And you really find the story in all places, and it's talking to you at all times. You just can't wait to sit down and keep writing it. And when I was doing Romeo and Juliet, I was picking up my brother from school, and they hadn't built anything next door. Now they did, but they just had the field. And I look back while I was waiting for him, and it was just the field, and they had the rolls and all that, right? And I was like, this is probably kind of what it might have looked like back then. And then I stared at it, trying to delete everything around me and just make the field be the only thing that existed. And then imagining my characters there, and imagining them so vividly that they could walk up to me and I could smell them, and really being able to walk with your story, and bring it all to life like that. That's a lot of my method.
I thought that was beautiful. What a great analogy. It's true. You have a moment. You might go through a thing where all of life kind of points at the thing for you, and the piece writes itself. You're just kind of a listener. I think a dramaturg once said it for me. They said, you become an Aeolian harp. You're just an instrument played by the played by the wind, and that's how you create music. To answer your question, I of course it so largely depends on what you have to write, and who's asking you to write it, and how much time you have, and how collaborative you can be. And so, I think there are processes of mine that have been like, I'm not putting a pen on the paper at all until I have people around me, and we can all talk about it. And there have been other times where it's like, everyone stay out, you know, it's my thing. But I hope that, you know, in teaching writing, encouraging people to write, there's the element that I do first when I'm creating the work that is completely foregoing self-censorship. Just write the freaking thing down. Write it down, whatever comes to mind. You know, the exercise is just stream of consciousness. If you're thinking about a sandwich you had today, and that sandwich and the ingredients in that, until eventually it's like, oh, I have to write this freaking play, and there's a story, I don't know what I want to say. And now I know there's gonna be this kid, and this kid is has whatever happening, you know. And at some point things come out, but you have to just keep writing, despite whatever blockage.
Well, I know there are so many questions out there. However, we're about at time. Luckily, we have a reception, which is over in the auditorium across campus, where we can continue this conversation. But I wanted to thank you all. This was really a generative and really beautiful conversation. So thank you, guys. So thank you all for your participation as well.